Hey YouTube, welcome back to the channel. It is your boy Rebound, and I am back at it again with another live stream. So, it's kind of, I guess we can call this a midnight chat. And, I've kind of been absent from these YouTube streets, but you all know that I'm very sensitive to these frequencies, which is why I don't pop up as much as I used to. But anyway, besides the topic of narcissism, the Bible was something that I really wanted to go ahead and start bringing to the channel. I feel that it is very important. And, recently I had a revelation and I realized that the church may have not gotten everything right when it comes to understanding this book. And from there, I've been doing a tremendous amount of research. And it looks as if, the descendants of the transatlantic slave trade are actually Israelites, is actually Israel, which, in my opinion, I believe that it's a very exciting thing. And what's interesting about it is that the church doesn't want you to know this information. The church will tell you that Israel doesn't matter. The church will say that Israel is replaced by the church. But in my opinion, after doing this research, I don't believe so. And I'm starting to believe that Eurocentric-centered Christianity is actually a part of the deception. And, in this video, I kind of want to just discuss my findings and, explain why this is important, especially considering that we're living in end times. And yeah, so we'll go ahead and go from there. So as you all know, I was brought this information let's say maybe about a month or 2 months ago, and I decided to do some research. I was always told that we don't know who Israel is and Israel doesn't matter. And yeah, it's very interesting, but also at the same time, I was always kind of discouraged from reading the Old Testament. And what's interesting as I'm diving into the Old Testament now is I'm starting to understand that the focus is on the nations of Israel. So the 12 tribes, right? So we have Abraham, then Isaac, then Jacob, and then Jacob gave birth to the 12 tribes. And we see this talked about in the book of Genesis, the book of Leviticus, the book of Exodus. It's all throughout the Old Testament, actually. And then we also have this discussed in the New Testament. However, the church will tell you that it's actually the church that Paul is talking to, but I do believe that Paul is actually talking to the nation of Israel, the Israelites. And so we know when we look at the book of Revelation that there's this huge deception happening. And I believe part of that deception is not knowing who the true descendants of Israel are, right? So we have the 1948 prophecy, which in my opinion was something orchestrated by the devil himself, the great red dragon, to deceive I guess you can say this new era of Christianity into believing a lie. And when you understand who the children truly are, then it exposes all of their lies, right? So here on the channel, we discuss all elements of narcissism, right? And I always say on the channel that if you can understand the narcissistic family, then you can understand the world that we live in. And within the narcissistic family dynamic, you have various familial roles, right? Within this dysfunctional system, we know that we live in a dysfunctional global system, an antichrist system. And from that system, you understand that the scapegoat is the empath of the family. The scapegoat is the compassionate one. The scapegoat is the loving one. The scapegoat is the one who has a closer relationship with God in most cases. And the scapegoat, just by simply existing, exposes who the narcissist is. And so when we look at the narcissistic family dynamic and the relationship, when we compare that to that of society, we realize that individuals of African descent are the scapegoats of society. And the reason why this is important is because the reason why these people are scapegoated is because of who they are biblically. And this is very important to understand, because if you don't understand who the nation of Israel is and why they're important, then you will never understand the scriptures. And so as I have come to this awareness, it's just been really exciting for me to really try to go back and break down the Old Testament, as I see that the Old Testament is literally centered around the nations of Israel. It is centered around it. And the Old Testament covers a huge portion of the Bible. And for the church to tell you that the nation of Israel does not matter, or that they are in Israel now, I do believe that that is a part of the deception, as I stated earlier. And so it looks as if, since I guess you can say the latter days, the devil has been working quite hard to deceive the public. And so what the devil did was he used the truth, aka the Bible, he spread it around the globe, and he steered people in the wrong direction. So he came in with this replacement theology. He came in with all these different denominations within Christianity alone. And we know that he's the author of confusion, right? And then we also have, I guess within the Christian branch, we have Catholicism, right? So that's another part of the deception. And then we also have the false, I guess you can say, Judaism, right? Which I do also believe that this is a part of the deception. And then we also have the Nation of Islam, as well as all the various spiritual and religious teachings out there. But only one is true. And we know that the Bible is true. However, once again, I do believe that the interpretation of the Bible is wrong. And this has been done purposely to deceive, a huge body of people in these latter days, right? And so I do believe that this information is something that, I have to keep kind of discussing on the channel as I go through this research, because, we're living in a time of prophecy. We're living in a time of, we know that we're living in end times, right? We know that Satan's kingdom is rising and it's really starting to show its face. We really are starting to see this fourth industrial revolution, this age of the mark of the beast, this age of you won't buy or sell without having the mark. And once again, a lot of Christians are attuned to this. They're aware of this. However, within the Christian church, within the various denominations of Christianity, they refuse to acknowledge who the descendants of Israel are. And so my argument is that the descendants of Israel, for those of you who have been following the channel, I do believe that they are descendants of the transatlantic slave trade. And so when we look at the transatlantic slave trade, we had anywhere from 80 million to 100 million people transported from one nation, or I guess you can say from the old world over into the new world. So this is a huge point in history, which I believe biblically it would be covered. And I do believe if we do look in the Bible, we can find it there. I also believe that America is a huge superpower, which came to fruition from these various Egyptians, Babylonian, Greco-Roman cultures, and is Mystery Babylon discussed in the Bible. And so when we have this huge event, it kind of seems quite odd if the Bible did not discuss this event, right? So going back to the deception when it comes to the various arms of religion, we understand that the religions that I brought up previously, they're all byproducts of Judaism, right? So you have Judaism, so you have God's people, and you have the culture, right? You have this love story between God's people and the Creator. And this is where we get the Old Testament, right? So this is before the Messiah comes in. And then the Messiah comes in, he tries to regather the people. He lives by the commandment, he lives by the law, and he's hated. He's hated by many. And of course, he's killed in the most brutal way. Now, when we look at Christ's experience on this planet, what is it symbolic of? It's symbolic of the black experience, right? And this is what the church, or this is what the devil does not want you to know. And so once again, it's truth hidden in plain sight. Okay. And then we have, once again, Christianity and its various denominations, which I also feel that it is a part of the deception, not to be confused with being a follower of Christ. I'm talking about the doctrine, right? This replacement theology, this mixing up the word, telling you that certain things doesn't matter, telling you that the commandments don't matter, practicing Easter, practicing Christmas. This is what I'm talking about, right? And then from there, we also have Catholicism. So you see a lot of European Greco influence with the mother goddess worship. This is why the Catholics worship Mary, right? And then if you really look at their symbolism, I want to say it was the Vatican. If you flip, there was something where I showed on this channel, but if you flipped it around, if you flipped it upside down, you actually see this image of a dragon, which is who they worship, right? And then you also have the Nation of Islam, right? So this is also a byproduct of Judaism, right? And I do believe that nation was actually created by I believe that a psychopath was actually influenced by a fallen angel, an archangel, and therefore he created that religion. And the reason why I call him a psychopath is because he tried to force people, or Muhammad tried to force people into the religion, and if they did not join, he murdered them. And this is the same thing that we see with this Eurocentric version of Christianity. So when you look at what happened in Spain and Portugal, or the Spanish Inquisition, you then realize that these European dictators were trying to force the Judean people into accepting Christianity, and if they didn't, they would kill them, right? And so when you look at this history, then you understand that the connection between the old world and the new world, or between biblical history and world history, is actually close together. But a lot of the history has been hidden from us. But in the academic realm, within, these different nations around the world, it seems almost as everyone knew this history besides, the descendants of the transatlantic slave trade. And so right now, I do believe that there is a huge awakening happening. And once again, I do believe that it's important to go ahead and share this word, so that if you don't fall within that lineage, you side with that lineage, right? So if you truly love the Lord, if you truly love truth, if you truly love the Bible, then you're not going to reject God's people, because truly, if you love the Lord, then you're going to love his people as well. So let's see here. So what I have here is two verses that I want to go ahead and read, and we can go ahead and tie up this teaching, right? So let's see here. So first, we'll go ahead and start with the book of Deuteronomy. So Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 45. And so right now, God is speaking to the Israelites, his chosen people. And he's explaining to them what will happen if you disobey my laws. What will happen if you break the covenant that I have fostered between, God, between his people and himself, right? And so it says, starting at 45, it says, all these curses shall come upon you and pursue you and overtake you till you are destroyed, because you did not obey the voice of the Lord your God to keep his commandments and his statutes that he commanded you. They shall be a sign and wonder against you and your offspring forever, because you did not serve the Lord your God with joyfulness and gladness of heart, because of the abundance of all things. Therefore you shall serve your enemy, whom the Lord will send against you, in hunger and thirst and nakedness and lacking everything. And he will put a yoke of iron around your neck until he has destroyed you. The Lord will bring a nation against you from far away, from the end of the earth, swooping down like an eagle, a nation whose language you do not understand, a hard-faced nation who shall not respect the old or show mercy to the young. It shall eat the offspring of your cattle and the fruit of your ground until you are destroyed. It also shall not leave you grain, wine, or oil, the increase of your herds, or the young of your flock, until they have caused you to perish. And so what I'm arguing here is that this verse, or this chapter, is actually talking about what the curses will bring upon the Israelites in the future, right? So a lot of us look at the Old Testament and we figure that the Old Testament, everything that is discussed in the Old Testament is actually happened in the past, but actually in the very first book, it actually prophesies about the future. So when Abraham had a vision, and it was actually prophesying about what would happen to Abraham's descendants, in the latter days. And so this is exactly what this verse is talking about. So let's go ahead and dissect it a little bit. Okay, so, and he will put a yoke of iron on your neck until he has destroyed you. So for those of you who have looked at imagery of slavery within the U.S., we have seen the yoke of iron around the neck of the slaves. He will bring a nation against you from far away from the end of the earth, swooping down like an eagle. What does the eagle represent? The eagle represents America, right? Whose language you do not understand, right? So that we know during this time, the Israelites spoke Hebrew, right? So of course, now they're being captured by a group of people whose language they don't understand, also swooping down like an eagle, which I also believe is a context clue right here, from far away, right? So a lot of people would argue that this is actually the land of Egypt, but Egypt wasn't far away, right? But America is, right? And a hard-faced nation who shall not respect the old or show mercy to the young. And so when you understand the black plight here in the Americas or here in the U.S., you understand that this has been something that blacks have had to face, or descendants of Israel had to face since the beginning of time. And this is why, because it's all spiritual, right? So we battle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, right? And this is why a lot of us, we have such a negative experience, right? Even from people ranging from the likes of myself to others within the black race. And then, people even outside the race. I feel like the closer that you are to God, God's law, God's commandments, God's people, then these curses you will start to see these curses pop up in your life. And once again, this information is very important to understand, because once you understand who the Israelites are in contemporary times, or in present times in contemporary history, then you can understand the deception for what it is. So now I want to go ahead and cover the book of Revelation without the S. Chapter 12, verse 13. Okay, so it says, "And when the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to the earth, he pursued the woman who gave birth to the male child." So this is going to symbolize the Messiah. Okay, and then, when we look at the book of Revelation, what my biggest flaw in understanding the book was the period of time that we were looking at the book. So I do believe that the book of Revelation is covering the latter days, but not just like the last 7 years of the world. I actually believe it could be covering anywhere from the last 800 to 1,000 years of the world. This is what we would call the latter days after the resurrection of the Messiah. I guess we can call that the latter days, right? So it says, "The woman was given 2 wings of the great eagle, so that she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness, to a place where she is nourished for a times, and half a times," right? So once again, we have this eagle symbolism, and in my opinion, I do believe that it represents America. The woman does not represent the church. She represents the 12 tribes of Israel, right? So this is who the woman is. And if we look at an earlier verse, I want to say that she is crowned 12 stars. So this is showing you who the woman is. This is confirming her identity. And I believe this is why the Christian church does not want you to read the Old Testament, because when you read the Old Testament, you are given these clues so that therefore you can understand the New Testament. But anyway, here we go. "So the serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman, and swept her away with the flood. But the earth came to the help of the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed the river that the dragon had poured from his mouth." This is a transatlantic slave trade, you all. And I know that I've talked about it before, but this is what it is, right? So the earth opening it up itself to swallow those waters, right? When we look at the transatlantic slave trade globally, the only way that the Israelites were able to go to all nations of the world was, especially here to the Americas, was by mass bodies traveling across mass bodies of water, right? So this is where we get the water symbolism, right? And we know that the dragon moves through people, in this case, nations of people, and also religions. And once again, this is the part of the deception. And so once again, when we look at the transatlantic slave trade, this was a huge point in history. And we can even argue that was a huge point in contemporary history, which links our history with biblical history, right? Which I believe is very fascinating. And the reason why a lot of us have really had a hard time understanding the Bible is because we couldn't link our history to biblical history, but it's all been there. So let me go ahead and start up at verse 17. It says, "Then the dragon became furious with the woman and went to make war on the rest of her offspring and those who keep the commandments of God and hold the testimony of Jesus," right? "And he stood on the sand of the sea," right? So once again, he stood on the sand of the sea. I'm guessing this is like many places. And then of course you have the woman. So you have the Israelites, the descendants of the transatlantic slave trade, and then her offspring. And so this is what we're going to have, the black plight here in the Americas, all across the world, right? I mean, once again, if there's one thing about this world, they can come together when it comes to the hatred of black people. And I do believe that there is an awakening happening now. And this is where we are going to get the prophecy of the two witnesses also discussed in the book of Revelation. So you have the house of Judah, and then you also have the house of Israel. And so this is this awakening process of the Israelites that the Bible is speaking of coming into this awakening. And so what is happening right now is the church is trying to suppress it, right? So even within, I guess you can say, the black Hebrew Israelite sphere, you have a lot of deception there too, but there's truth within that deception. And so once again, it's very important not to be deceived by this stuff, but it's also very important to discuss this stuff because it exposes all of the lies. It exposes the deception. It exposes what this nation, aka the U.S., Mystery Babylon, it exposes who it is. It exposes all the different denominations within Christianity who will not even acknowledge who the Israelites are, right? It exposes the 1948 deception, right? So once again, if God is going to do something, God does not need the UN, does not need all these, demonic nations who created these global wars to do something for him. And when you look at the people who were placed in Israel in 1948, the 400-year prophecy, it doesn't link to them. These people don't even belong in the land, but they're claiming ownership to a land that is not theirs. And the church, and this is how you know, this is a good indicator that you know that this is a good indicator that you know that the church is in bed with the devil, right? Because these people don't even acknowledge the Messiah. And I guess you can say Messianic Jews, they're one of their own, but the majority of people in that land don't acknowledge the Messiah. And for the Christian church to say we side with Israel, but you side with the people who do not recognize the Messiah, you can see the deception within this false Judean faith. You can see it within the Christian faith, and don't confuse that with followers of Christ. Of course, you can see the deception within the Nation of Islam, and then you can see the deception within the Catholic faith. And once again, if you identify who the book is talking about, if you understand that this book is an African book of God trying to amend his relationship with his chosen people, then you can understand what the deception is and how deep the deception goes. And once again, this is not, I did not come up here to make this divisive, because once again, for people within the faith, if you side with Israel, you are A-okay, right? But if you reject them, then this is where we come into having problems, right? So like for anyone out there right now who may have prejudice against, people of African descent, who may have hatred or racism or are racist towards these people, you don't love the Father, right? So if you don't acknowledge God's people, then you're not acknowledging God. And so, if, I had a household, right? And someone did not love my children, then that means you do not love me. And so it's the same way with God and his children, right? And so I think that is very important. When it comes to the scriptures, we really have to be careful with this replacement theology. We have to be willing to look at the book with a humble heart and an open mind. And we have to accept truth for what it is, no matter who we are, right? So there's a possibility I could be a Gentile. I'm okay with that. I still side with Israel. And if I'm Israel, I still side with Israel. But this is important. And once again, it's important to look at the whole book, not just the New Testament, not just the Gospels, not just Paul's writing, right? It's important to go back to the beginning of the book and read throughout the Old Testament, because then you understand the importance of God's chosen people. And so when you understand that, then you know in the New Testament that he did not do away with his people. He's still trying to create or reform that covenant with his people. And once again, this is important because the waking up of God's people, the turning back to the Messiah from God's people, is what is going to allow Bible prophecy to unfold. And that is a beautiful thing, right? So as I continue to do more studies when it comes to looking at the DNA, looking at the Spanish Inquisition, looking at both European sources and Israelite sources when it comes to explaining this history, I'm going to go ahead and bring it to the channel. In my opinion, I believe that this is something to be extremely excited about. And this awakening is so beautiful, once again, because it exposes all the lies. And also, this is what is prophesied about in the book of Revelation, right? And so, I want to go ahead and share the word, so we can go ahead and get prophecy unfolding, because we need it. This nation, it needs to be judged, as well as all the other nations, for all the BS that they have done to God's people. And once again, this is why the church won't tell you who God's people are. This is why, because then you realize that it's been fraud from the whole time. This nation, it thrived on the backs of God's people, which is, in a way, we can argue that that's why this nation became so successful, so abundant, right? So when Joseph in the Old Testament was pulled into slavery, when he was captured as a slave and in bondage, he had the gifts of telling dreams, or breaking down dreams. And because he was there in the land, Egypt was abundant. So it's no different than what we see here in the U.S. There's nothing new under the sun. And so once again, it's very important for us to go back and study the Old Testament, because the Old Testament is the key to understanding the New Testament. And once again, for those of us, whether we're inside Israel or outside of Israel, it is time for us to come together as a people and unite with Israel. All right. So with that stated, I will talk to you all next time. Take care and have a beautiful night. I'll talk to you later. Bye.